I'm Dr. Manju Appathurai, and this is The Centered Edge. My passion for these conversations comes from my own journey. This podcast is an effort to translate that lived experience into something meaningful and positive. Now, let's get into the episode. So let's begin. I'm Dr. Manju Appathurai, and this is The Centered Edge. And today we have with us Hartini Zainudin. Needs
Hi.
no introduction. A child rights advocate in Malaysia, very passionate about what she does. So, Tini, maybe you want to start us off by telling us, where does this burning passion come from?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And to give me the opportunity to talk about the work that we do. I guess the passion, I never get old of the question, but I never really have an answer because I think it stems from so many things. My whole foray into child rights and child protection was actually accidental. The truth of the matter is it's just I like and love being around children. I think I'm childish, childlike, but in so many ways. And from young, I think I've always had an affinity to hang out with children because I just am fascinated because all of us have been children growing up. I have seen gaps in the system where I think, you know what? My guiding light is that all children should be happy and protected. And when I see something I don't like, I try very hard to help. And that sort of consistency and drive is what made me an activist. I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's been excellent.
I've always admired your childlike. It's really amazing to see you. Every time I see you, I'm like, I'm awed. You work with a lot of cases where young people are tried as adults.
Children at the pleasure of the king.
So is our legal system not understanding enough about the brain development of a child and how a child should be treated in the criminal justice?
No, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And you've actually hit the nail on the head. A lot of the work that we do around children in conflict with the law and children at the pleasure of the king has been lacking that advocacy on child development and what happens when you hold children in prison or in detention for long periods of time. It's the same kind of impact when you have a child in immigration detention, you hold them and you say it's protection when we know it's not, and it stems and holds and hinders the development of a child. Same thing with children at the pleasure of the king, which are children who have committed heinous crime under the law, who obviously cannot be sentenced to death because they're children, and then they're then committed to prison at the pleasure of the king for as long as they want, right? So you have 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds in prison for 25 years, etc. and stuff, who never see the light of day until someone does something or until the king or the sultan decides to pardon them. And it does stem the development of a child. I've worked with children in prison for about 15 years, and I am constantly shocked at how little they know about the world when they come out. They go in as children, they come out as adults. They don't know how to take the bus. There's so many psychological impact in terms of just doing everyday things like we take for granted. Taking a bus, for example, or learning to take a grab, or using a hand phone, or knowing how to socialize, etc. There are no orientation programs in terms of allowing that child who is now an adult to transition into working and with society and working amongst everyone else. And it's a problem. It scares me because when you isolate children who've already been isolated, it doesn't give them much room to grow and to progress as individuals and stuff and to be productive citizens. It just makes it so much harder. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. That's because they have supports. But this whole, these children are marginalized. And then they're coming out, the impact on what happens, what they know, because they've not had the support as children, protection as children, prioritized as children. It impacts the way they grow up, think, and see the world, and interact.
So let us gain a little bit of understanding, because I don't think most of us know how it actually works, right? Okay, let's say this kid is 12-year-old, found guilty. Do they get sent to a school? Do they get sent to prison? And in the prison, are they with adults? Is there protection for them? Is there education? Is there psychological therapy? How does it work?
When a child is sentenced and charged and tried as a child at the pleasure of the king, it means their heinous crimes, rape, murder, etc., have been commuted from, because you can't pronounce a death sentence. So their sentence has to be serious. It's so 100 years old Victorian period, it's more than 100 years old, it's based on that. So their sentence is commuted to life imprisonment until the king or the sultan pardons. That's what it means, or the head of the state. And it has never actually looked at what the basic needs of children are in order to develop them to be a productive citizen, right? There is education, so there is a Sekolah Integrity in prison in Kajang, where children who can afford, it's not free, to pay to go to school, can go to school. So like all the kids, the boys that I've helped, like we've had to raise money to pay for all their education. Otherwise, they don't go to school. And if they don't go to school, they get transferred to another prison. Not only Kajang has a school. I don't know if the plan is to develop more schools in other prisons, but right now it's Kajang. So the kids panic, the young men panic every semester since I've known them, 2015, so it's been 11 years. Well, it's 11 years, my God. Anyway, so every semester, these boys, so I met 5 of them, all children at the pleasure of the king, who were young men. Every semester they panic because if their parents or their families cannot afford to pay for their school fees, they're out of school. And when they're out of school, they get transferred to lesser schools with less facilities. So they only have education. Every semester I get all these emails. So I have 10 years of emails, and when they're coming, it's every semester, can you help us pay for the school fees? Can you help against textbooks? And so creative ways in which the young men, I keep calling them children, but they're not anymore. Can you pass? Some friend of theirs gets out of prison and has agreed to get them textbooks. So I have to buy the textbooks and then pass the textbooks to their friends who are out, who will pass it to the prison guards and who will send the textbooks to the kids. You pay for the school fees online and you do. So I have these boys, young men, ask me for stuff. And so that's just cool, yeah? And then they get like, you can buy Raya hampers, for example, to make sure they get Raya food once a year or all sorts of stuff. And then they have internet from Mondays to Fridays from 9 to 12. So you answer all the emails that way, but you get to know them and you get to hear their dreams and what they want to be. Then you hear the hope that like, when I get out, this is what I want to do when I do this. So you get that part and then they get out. And this is where it's been over the years, like I said, and we're hoping it's changed. But so they come out, and I had one young man, he came out, and he called me. It's so dramatic. Called me in the rain. And he had gone in, 13, and he came out and he called me from, she didn't have a hand phone, so he called me from some all payphones. I don't know how he got me, but it was in the rain. And he's like, I don't know how to take a bus. This is where my bus story comes from. And I feel like far away, right? I don't know how to take a bus. So I'm like, okay, this is what I think you do. You go to police station and then you buy a ticket. He's like, I said, how much money do you have? He said, I think he has a certain amount of money with 2 sets of clothes. It's pay me. And he says, you go there and yeah, because he's in the rain. So you just say, go to police station, you say, this is where you want to go, right? I said, use the money to pay a ticket. I just like walk him through the thing. Okay, so that's one part. Then, of course, it's like, I don't want to stay in Malaysia. I want to go somewhere else. It's like writing resumes, helping him get a job, going all that, which is fine and it's practical. But then you have the social part because he sees a young lady he likes and he says, I don't know how to ask her out on a date. Do I tell her that I was in prison for murder? And I'm like, you do not tell a young girl that you're trying to court and date that you went to prison for murder. You do not do that. So you literally have to walk them through all this. No, there's no counseling. What counseling? We barely getting school. So for me, I think one of the objectives that I want to do, if I had a wish list of top 5 priorities, is to get rid of household children at the pleasure of the king. Now, or at least what step by step to make sure that the laws that are in place to protect these children get implemented, because they're not.
You said you talked a lot about the young boys. Are there young girls as well who are in this?
I don't know. I only know the 5 boys. I know that there are, I think, 7 more in prison all over Malaysia. There's 7 more children under the king. I know that there are cases coming up which, if tried, they would be sentenced on their children at the pleasure of the king if they found guilty. I pray they don't. So heinous crimes are not the fact that we have a law that says children can be tried as adults for crimes, heinous crimes, if they're 10 years old and above, for me, is an abomination. 10 years old, how adult do you think these kids are? What exactly does that mean? There is this ironic term, which I blame the UN system. I used to work for the UN, which says a child is defined as someone under the age of 18. Children don't miraculously mature just because you turn 18. That's not how it works, especially when a child is marginalized, does not get basic needs going to prison, comes from a poor family, lives in rural areas and stuff. There are exceptions to what and how a child develops to the full potential to become a productive adult at 18. It doesn't happen. I'm sorry, I'm 21 years old. I have all the basic needs when I was 21, not that I'm 21. And I still think I'm a child. I'm 64 this year. I still think I'm a child. I think I'm that mature. So for someone to say, and I hate that repetition, that sort of parroting of a child is someone's defined, someone is 18 years old. I get it, physically maybe, but in loads of other aspects, no, developmentally involved. Not, you don't suddenly become an adult just because you're 18 and given this whole responsibility. So there's a lot of irony in terms of just saying that. It doesn't work that way, not if you've had basic needs denied.
Have you seen a system where you think that really worked? That's something that we should be doing in Malaysia. What would be the alternative?
The alternative thing is to actually look as a child as an individual person, sentient being, call it what you want, and making sure that a child grows up with all basic needs, right? So it's access to education and health, actions for socialization, a good family, a support system, access to being able to learn to the best of their ability. Just that, yeah. Those are basic needs, the basic rights. They're not extras. They're not coming from a rich family, 2 parents in the household. No, we're just talking about family support. They have community support. They have just basic that. That's all I'm asking for. We still don't have that. I work with those marginalized children. Definitely not have.
Have you seen a trend or some sort of a demography or some sort of a pattern of the kind of children who end up in this system?
The ones that I know, most of them, I'll say this, because I know that a couple of the children, the young men, do not come from poor families. They actually they come from middle English. Poverty, I think, is just one of the elements, but it isn't just poverty. There's a whole slew of elements, issues, circumstances that deny a child, or not deny a child, but sort of makes that child more at risk, or being more susceptible, or being more exposed to being in conflict with the law if parents don't supervise child and they come from poor families and there's no supervision and there's no support system and you're poor, no one educates you, you don't have information, the right information. So there's so many circumstances. But in many of the cases, especially with the children, I don't think it's just a matter of poverty. It was the no access to good education, information, safety. There's so many things.
We do have schools like Henry Gurney School and all that.
Yeah.
Do those work? Does that system work?
It works for the system. It works for the authorities, for sure. Does it work for the child? No. I'm sorry. Our indicators of what a good child should have in order to be the best version of themselves is not Henry Gurney. Henry Gurney is part of a system where children at the pleasure of the king, that stems from the Victorian period of English long ago colonialism, that says children need to be rehabbed and children need to be put in detention as punishment. The objective of why these children are there is not to protect children or to make sure they become the best version of them. It's to ensure that children are punished for committing crimes and that they learn their lessons. And that kind of approach is not going to ensure that the child is most productive.
So if these children don't have access to therapy, to counseling, to any psychology treatment, when they go out, are they actually changed, or do most of them are repeat offenders after that?
I don't know. I will tell you this, it's so much harder for them to interact and sustain is the right word, sustain the change and desire to change as much as they want. I worked with 5 of the kids, so I'm in touch with 4 of them. And it's been hard to get a job, to get a loan, to succeed without that system of protection and support and nurturing in place. It's really tough. Now, I get nervous. I actually brought one of the boys to meet one of the MPs to talk about this. And it's my fault too, because I brought the young man and said, let's do this. And then I got distracted with other stuff. And we still see each other. Actually, I should bring this up because I didn't get to see him last year, one of them. So I'm going to do a book puasa. But to get a system in place, there's the stigma of being an ex-prisoner. There are very little opportunities for these young men and women to succeed. You have us to build in that support system. I worry. They're like, someone asked me once, why do you bother with ex-prisoners? And I'm like, do you see what they can become? Because I can. These boys, young men, have bachelor's, master's, PhDs. You don't want them to succeed. Do you know the impact they can have on society and the kind of good they can do and the kind of inspiration and role model they can become for younger adults, younger children, and the kind of awesomeness they are, for lack of a better word, because they're awesome. In this world where things are so difficult for so many, I think they're a source of inspiration. I think they're hope. So I want them to succeed. And I know what one person can do for the rest of the world. So I see the desire, and it's not that I see good in everyone. That is so romantic and idealistic. That's not it. I see the boys better than most for who they can become and the potential of good they can do. And because of that, I want to do it.
You not only worked with children who are in the prison system, you also work with a lot of other issues involving children.
Yeah, I know. They're apparently all over the place, but I don't know how to put that and compartmentalize because I think it's all related. But yes.
Let's talk about children born out of wedlock in Malaysia. That's still very much an issue. So what is the current status of these children? Do they have to have a father's name on the birth certificate? What happens if they don't? What's the system like?
I'm not on the birth certificate. They're child born out of wedlock, and that's down right, which means their parents are unwed. Their father's names are not recognized, and you have to go to court to be able to prove that father has a right to protect his own child. That's just how our laws are. This isn't about religion or culture. And I think when you put on a different lens in terms of how you perceive a child, they're not a byproduct because the parents committed a crime or sin. That is secondary if you're religious in your culture. And I'm not dismissing religion or culture. I'm just saying my lens that I put on, because I do work in child rights and child activism, comes from a child rights, child protection system. For me, front and center is always the child. So to stigmatize, to discriminate, to marginalize a child who is born out of wedlock is just a crime, because a child is innocent. They didn't ask to be born. This is what happened. And from the get-go, the moment they're conceived, they're already at a disadvantage. And when they're at a disadvantage, the law just got changed with the federal constitution on statelessness and citizenship. And it hasn't even been implemented fully because it's not retrospectively. Anyway, besides that, I don't want to get into the legal technicalities. But you can be denied access to being. We just talked about rights and going out with no access to health services, education and stuff. This happens if you're a child born out of wedlock and your mother is not Malaysian. This happens to you if your mother gets scared and decides she doesn't want to go to jail, because in certain states you will be punished if you have a child born out of wedlock. And the child is, never mind the mother, she will dump the child. She'll abandon. These are the children I pick up. These are the mothers who are so terrified they're 12, 13 years old, they get raped, etc. Incest, whatever it is, right? Because the number one form of sexual abuse in this country is incest. And these children are 10, 11, 12 years old. So they have these babies, they don't know anything, they don't even know their body because we don't have proper sex education in this country. And they kill their child, they murder the child's infanticide, or they abandon their child. And the child has no documents. And then they're not considered Malaysian, then they have no access. That is why I do all the different rights. This is why I'm all over the place. Because, there is no specialty. There is no one issue in terms of looking at protecting children, because it comes from all angles. And sometimes I get fed up because I'm like, I don't really care what you think. You, the general public, who decide that you're going to criticize me, because if I don't step in, and this is my world, this is the only thing I know what's going to happen to that child. So I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to judge me before I decide whether I'm going to move. So for me, working with marginalized children covers all aspects because it impacts all aspects. And the child who is stateless, who have no access to services, who have no protection and stuff, may grow up and be at risk more than any other child to go to prison. I'm going to do more prevention work than reactionary, which is all we do as a system.
That was a little bit of a shocker. So women get punished if they have children out of wedlock?
Of course they do. And we only have reformative schools for women. We don't have any reformative schools for the men who get the women pregnant or rape them.
And does the child get taken away from them?
Many times.
Yeah.
Many times. I have a case now.
Even if it's not a choice, it's just taken away.
Because they're considered unfit. Our definition of who an unfit mother is very narrow. If you can't afford to take care of your child, or you're considered unfit, whatever that means, child born in wedlock, you can't afford, they will take away your child.
And what sort of impact? Of course, if the child is taken away from the mother, that's one thing. But children who are generally born out of wedlock,
right to take away a child from the mother unless that mother is hurting the child. Who gives you that right to decide whether you're fit enough? Just to backtrack a little bit, I have a problem with our moral, religious, cultural thing of who is a fit mother. If you're 14 years old and you've been raped and you're supposed to be in school and then you're forced to marry someone, who raped you, and then the man decides he's going to divorce you, you're on your own, you're not in school, and you have a child, is that mother unfit? Because that is a reactionary way of looking at how you protect the mother. And we're so reactionary when the best way for a mother is to keep her child, support the mother and child, make sure she goes back to school, have a communal system where you protect the child, go to kindergarten and stuff. You pool all your resources together as a community. Start with the stigma, start with protect the mother so that the child grows up with her parents and not being pushed back. 90% of all our shelters, government shelters and stuff, are filled not with orphans, but with children whose families cannot take care of them. What are we doing? Why aren't we building systems that allow the communities to take care of their own? Why are we building shelters? This is what I'm talking about.
What are the implications for these children? Let's say if born out of wedlock, are they able to enter school? What happens?
If you don't have SIT documents and you are a foundling, which is a child that's been abandoned, usually they're all born out of wedlock. Right? Nobody abandons children just like that. Then they are not considered Malaysian. You have to prove they're Malaysian. You can take 3 years to prove they're Malaysian. The government says they're going to take 2 years. That's rubbish. We'll see. It's not been implemented. I have children waiting 21 years. They're not even children in. Top student, private university, wants to be a doctor, hands up, writing magazines for health magazines. What happens to the children? They have no rights, they're invisible, they don't have any access, and they shrivel and we lose them.
If two consenting adults in Malaysia had a child out of wedlock, and these are working adults who can afford to keep the child, what happens then?
The child is still considered born out of wedlock under the religious law for one religion. If the child is conceived over 3 months old, so if they're born instead of 9 months to hold a baby, they're born 6 months or 7 months or 8 months, they're still considered children born out of wedlock, even though the parents get married. And that's under one religion. Actually, under all religion. Well, it's definitely enforced.
So this cuts across all religions, and even if it happened to me.
And I know under Islam it does. I don't know about the rest. I'm not sure about that. But definitely if the child is born out of wedlock and there's no marriage, you can't produce a marriage certificate that's recognized by the government. Let's be clear about what that means. It means that child is not considered a child born in wedlock if the parents cannot produce a marriage certificate that is recognized by the authorities. Okay, that's the definition. So if you get married in a religious or cultural thing or in a different country and you don't register that marriage in Malaysia and it's not recognized, your child can be considered born out of wedlock. So it's not just young girls getting pregnant.
There was one issue that I read some time back about if a Malaysian woman marries a foreigner, if it's the other way around, the child is recognized. Yes. If it's a Malaysian woman and a foreigner, it's not recognized.
That has changed, but it's not retrospectively. So all those women who fought to have their children recognized because they're born abroad and married and their fathers are foreigners, that's not retrospective. So they all have to go in and file. It's not automatic. Let's see, it's not been enforced yet.
These babies that you pick up who've been abandoned by their mothers, what is that process like? Because in Malaysia, do we need to then first identify their race? We need to first identify if they are even Malaysian?
There is no child. When you find a baby, they don't have a stamp on their forehead that says Malaysian, Muslim, Malaysian. No, there are no documents to prove it because those are man-made laws and man-made policies and recognition by the state that this child belongs to them. There is no stamp. So a child comes, so you're going to look at it and say foreigner. The assumption is that they're foreigners. That's baloney. In all the cases I've done for the last 18 years, 99% were Malaysian children. 99%. They are Malaysian young mothers who give up the babies because they're scared, etc. and stuff. The ones who give up the babies, who are foreigners, are the ones who cannot pay their hospital bills in hospitals. Those are the refugees and sex stealers, etc. And there are babies born at home and stuff. But most of the people who give out their babies are Malaysians. None, almost not, I'm going to say not none, 99% of Malaysian mothers. And when you trace them, which I have done, they're Malaysian mothers.
This podcast is supported by Work. More than just a co-working space, it's an ecosystem built for human connection. So whether you're established or you're a startup, find room to grow at Work.
So if you are able to trace them, then what happens? If you're able to, then what happens to the child?
When I found 4 babies that were about to be trafficked, right, and sold by a Malaysian person. When we got an independent investigator to go trace who these biological children, these baby boys, all 1 year old, trace them who they were, we managed to trace 3 of the 4 biological parents. They were all Malaysians. So we gave them babies back. One of them didn't. We got that baby adopted, who's now 16. But yeah, Malaysians, not foreigners. The assumption that they are is rubbish.
These babies that are born to these young mothers who cannot keep them for whatever reason, how many of them end up
keeping their babies?
in being trafficked? And
because the ones who get trafficked have no documents, so we can't trace them. My daughter was adopted, was almost trafficked. I had to buy her back from the traffickers.
How active is
Huge.
trafficking?
I do work on anti-trafficking. It's a huge business. It has overtaken drug trafficking as the number 2 most profitable form of trafficking in the world. And now with wars, etc. and stuff, children are just disappearing because parents get killed or they can't trace them. They're just being bought and sold and bought and sold and bought and sold. So everybody says child prostitution and child trafficking for prostitution and sexual abuse or organ harvesting. Yeah, it's that terrible. So when you do something to contribute to enabling people to sell and buy babies, I've got a huge problem with you. I'm going to try to do whatever I can.
So these trafficked babies are for
Baby selling?
either
Yeah.
to
Did you
sell
just
to
read the
parents
case
or
from Indonesia to Singapore? Do you know how long that's been going on? Malaysian parents sending their babies to Singaporeans, etc. It's been going on for years since the day I did start to work in Malaysia. Forever. It's been going. As long as you're poor, you're marginalized, you're discriminated against, you don't protect the mothers, you don't do, until you do things to marginalize children, we're going to have baby selling and trafficking.
and also some of these children end up in prostitution.
Most
and also
72% of them do. Do you know that trafficking a human being is as productive and profitable as raising a cow? Look, I'm sorry, I'm going to be very blatant. You can organ harvest, raise children, give girls to be sex workers and sex factories. You can sell their babies every night 1 year. You can use them for services. You can use both the boys and the girls for forced labor. And when you're done with them, you kill them and harvest their organs. And you can maim them and still use them for trafficking because he's begging. My daughter was targeted for begging. They were going to maim her. She was 2.5 months old. How do you not get angry and not want to do something? 2.5 months old.
Is it very childish to think that, that this is an unsolvable problem? Why is there no clamping down?
It's not an unsolvable problem. Everything's man-made. It stems from the fact that you decided, not God, not culture, not religion. You, the government authorities, decided that this person doesn't deserve to be a citizen of this country just because they were born. It's as simple as that. This is not God's wrath. This is the authorities deciding this is a man-made law to decide that this child doesn't belong to this country. That is what the problem is.
Far-reaching, isn't it?
Yes.
Because people don't get punished.
Nobody wants to follow it through. You decide it's easier to dismiss because somehow it makes your brain power explode and you can't think about it because it's unfathomable. But it's that simple and that basic, that impactful, that horrible.
We got people in power, I suppose, just like Epstein case.
The Epstein case? Child trafficking, child sex work. There's snuff and there's pornography and there's the debasement. It is so vile, and yet it's not that shocking to me because we do it for children who nobody cares about. And women, men and boys.
I always get scared when I see these particularly little girls on the streets because I can imagine the horrors they must be going through. And access to education, isn't that something that's warranted by UN Charter? Isn't that something that we should be providing?
In this country, I just came back from Geneva, where the Malaysian government presented the Malaysian report on the protection and rights of children after 12 years. And the minister did an amazing job. But we have reservations on access to education. It is for Malaysian children, not children in Malaysia. There is no equitable access, primary or secondary. If you're a refugee, you're stateless. If you're in prison, school, you have basic education. Does that ensure that it's equitable and quality? Why do we have a reservation on that? It makes no sense. We say education is the way out of poverty and we insist on keeping them marginalized children in these states.
What is the other side? What is their rationale for keeping these children out of the education system?
The rationale is they're not Malaysian children, rubbish. We do that to Malaysian children. Your children with disabilities, your children in prison, your children who are born out of wedlock, your children, you girls in reform schools, basic education is not going to get you anywhere. We know this. So if you don't want to do it because it's a matter of resources, then allow the NGOs and private educational systems to do it. Why are you stopping us? We're not encouraging people to produce more children born out of wedlock. We're trying to stem a problem and to provide support systems and channels for children to be the best versions of themselves. I don't understand the logic. It makes no sense. You're not promoting promiscuity, nor demoralizing, nor tainting the religious and cultural roots of this country by protecting our children. Just blows my mind.
Talk to me a little bit about adoption. Is it an easy system? Is it difficult? Are single moms allowed to adopt single dads? Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about this system.
Well, both the Registration Act and our laws on adoption are very convoluted. And I say this with due respect. Our laws on adoption are from 1964. 62. 1957. We have the most convoluted form of adoption ever. We have one adoption law that applies to Sarawak, one adoption law that applies to Sabah because of the different independent states' cultural and needs, and then we have one for Peninsula. They've not been amended. All three have not been amended except for once, for different reasons. Does not take into account foundlings. It does not take into account who can adopt. Besides, you have to be 21 years and above. Income and stuff are all subjective. Welfare doesn't have an implementation. We have no implementation law that says how long a period you should be incubated before you can adopt. There is no visiting rights. There is no criteria. There's nothing. There's no foster care. That we have adoption or we have institutions. That's how much we think about children who need to be adopted. And then you have Sharia law, which says you cannot adopt. We're not allowed to adopt. So how do we look at that? How are the other Islamic countries looking at that? When we have civil adoption, which is through court. Then you have private adoption, which means biological mothers have the right to choose who they want to give the baby to. So that's where a lot of the gaps are. But then you cannot take away the rights of biological mothers to choose who they want to give the babies to. We also have cultural implementation because culturally and religiously, people gave away their children with no documents.
Yeah.
So it's very convoluted. So what some of us are trying to do it for 15 years, what we're really pushing it this year, is to map out the different kinds of gaps in systems and overview of what adoption law is in Malaysia, what needs to happen, and what are the different kinds of family-based care and kinship and all these different things to be able to try to address the issue in adoption so we can better protect children. Because right now, we have a tendency to only want to adopt babies, but if you're 4 years old or 3 years old, 2 years old and above, nobody adopts. So our institutions, our NGOs, our private institutions, are filled with children who nobody wants. And then we don't have independent living. What happens to them when they leave at 18? I have some of those children. I know. Foundlings grow up, abandoned babies grow up. They get adopted when they're babies. When they're over one, nobody wants them. So what happens to all of them? Do you know how many children we have out there?
Yeah.
For a small country like ours, we don't care. A lot. Too many.
Started the Child Kid Foundation, right?
Yeah.
But that area has developed quite a bit. Tell me about the journey of the Child Kid Foundation and has that poverty in that region in that area been solved, or have we just pushed it further away and not really solved anything?
I started it. I never, again, accidental. I was looking for something to do. I came back in 2001, 3 months before September 11th. I lived in New York. I came back because I wanted a break. I hadn't been home to Malaysia for 6 years. I had always meant to work with the UN system. I had this, Rose kind of, I laugh every time I think about it, but it's true. I always wanted to work for the UN abroad. It was always helping refugees. It was always helping children in war conflict zones, etc. and stuff. And I had these visions of me. And then I come home to Malaysia. This happens. I take a break. I stay in Malaysia. And then I wanted to volunteer because that's what I did a lot of in New York. And then I volunteered with one of the NGOs here. I worked in the Bronx in Hunts Point because I worked with those performing schools in New York with kids in gangs, etc. So they sent me to Chalkett because I worked in the Bronx and Hunts Point and Bed-Stuy and all these places very closely. We thought it's the same thing. And actually it was, but it's worse here because there is no system that protects children who are marginalized in outer systems, and you don't even get food. And you had no access to food. And I thought, what the hell? So honestly, the work in Chalkett started as me as a volunteer, looking at basic needs that weren't met. I was shocked because I think I was very sheltered. I always thought Malaysia had provided for everybody. I used to say when I was in America, and I lived there for 20 years, that I was so proud of the fact that we never said, not when I was growing, Malay Malaysians, Chinese Malaysians, Indian Malaysians, we're just Malaysians. And I was so proud of the fact that we're multilingual and multicultural, that we never had, and I'm a product, I'm half Chinese and half Malay, but I never had to choose. And I grew up during May 13th, etc. and that all. But never in my life has anyone ever made me feel marginalized and stuff. So I didn't know there was this whole other world where children were discriminated against forever, were left in poverty and discrimination and stigma. I only thought it happened in other countries, not Malaysia. So imagine my shock. I go to Chalkett and there's all these children sleeping on the streets, getting raped, getting beaten, getting sold, I just sat there and I'm like, you sold a baby for what? 2 sticks of shabu? 20 ringgit. Someone sold a baby for 20 ringgit, which is 2 sticks of shabu for drugs. And I thought, where am I? I don't need to go abroad to work with children in conflict war zones. We're in I'm in an area where children were being treated far worse and being sold for 2 sticks of shabu. And I thought, I don't need to go elsewhere. And there is a blessing in the fact that I came back to my roots and I knew where I wanted to work. And then I decided I wasn't going back to New York.
Let's talk a little bit about drug use. How bad is it among children? How prevalent?
I'm not the expert on working on children who are on drugs. I think they're better experts than me, but I will tell you my little experience of working with children who were drug addicts. And we're going back 10, 15 years because I adopted a child who was a Rohingya refugee who had been on drugs since he was 7 years old. And by the time I met him, he was 13 and he was like on 4 different cocktails, a mix. He was rolling shabu sticks. He was high all the time. And someone had called me from the hospital to help him so that he didn't go to prison. And because he was a Rohingya refugee, it was his second offense being caught. He was definitely going to jail. And I adopted him so that he could get access to drug rehab. Except there was no drug rehab for children. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Do you know where they get put? They get put in, this is years ago, they get put in adult psych wards to get them to go through their 3 days of withdrawal tied down with concoctions of, I don't know what, to try to minimize the pain they're in when they go through withdrawal. He was 13. He had little matchbox cars in his pocket when I went to court to get to revoke his mother's parental right to him so that I could adopt him, so I could send him to drug rehab, which was the hospital, adult psych ward for men. That was his withdrawal. He tied him down for 3 days. I was so shocked. I promised I didn't do it. So I decided to work with one of the NGOs who was helping adults get through withdrawals of drugs so they could have drug rehab. And I paid money for 6 children, teenagers, 13 and 16, to get drug rehab. And not one got through. And you know what? That was just so painful. And because I had adopted this 13-year-old, he ran away from the center 8 times. But 8 times how bad it was. He was doing heroin and he was found unconscious by my staff with a syringe up his thigh. And then I said, you know what? I'm revoking his adoption because he's doing worse, because he missed his mother. It had nothing to do with drug rehab. He had everything to do with family and the fact that his family was fragmented and taken away from him.
The issues are far more complex than people realize, because we're talking about humans, right? Yeah. So every case is different. Every case is unique. So you can't, but does the government have the capacity to do that? And is it always the NGOs who we hear about who are?
I think the NGOs are slightly better because we look at it from a child protection lens. I think the government, just like the system, because it's the government that's enforcing the system, is looking at it from a punishment, punitive approach to making sure that you try to deter people from committing a crime or punishing them after they commit a crime. And we forget, in the cases that I work with, the children, and there is no deterrence and there is no punishment because you completely destroy their lives. But you did. You completely destroyed their lives. And then you ask the NGOs to pick up the pieces and try to make it better, you throw away that child. Because that's what you do. You throw away people and lives.
How involved involved are corporates in this? Because there are always this TikTok and Instagram. They go visit all these places.
Corporates are doing a better job now with ESGs. They've got a long way to learn about what the issues are and to really understand, because, and I guess you can't really blame them because they're looking at it from a branding standpoint of view, and you're looking at shareholders and you have to answer to shareholders and their dividends and companies and stuff. There has to be a way in which companies and NGOs and the other stakeholders in the community, they have to come together to look at whatever the issues are in that area. Because the other issue and the biggest problem we have in many countries, not just Malaysia, is that you do a one-size-fit-all kind of approach to issues and you have to contextualize them. The issues are prevalent in that, maybe in that one area. So if you look in an area like Sabah, which has a lot, it's a big country with logistics issues, never mind the fact that you have poverty, 1/3 of them are stateless, etc., and you have all these issues with migration, etc. That's just Sabah. It's different from Sarawak. It's different from Peninsula. It's different. There are so many issues. You don't find refugees in Sabah and Sarawak, yeah? Only refugees are in Peninsula. There's so many issues that impact a lot of what is going on. Poverty, food security, malnutrition, access to health, inoculation, etc. There are so many, and that it's contextualized. And that the biggest way to solve a lot of the issues from an NGO perspective and civil society perspective is to do the capacity building and allow the NGOs to do the work, change the policies. Very simple. Please allow everybody to do what they're supposed to do, work together. You can coordinate, you can license, you cannot, but you're not the experts and you don't have the resources, authorities. No. That's just how the world changes. So you need to change with it. So allow us that space to do our work. We're not saying we're better than you. We're just saying we all need to work together. Why are you pretending or insisting that we're anti-government? We're not.
My first experience working with a child with sexual violence was a 7-year-old boy. It was very difficult for me because when you read about it, it's one thing for podcast people who are listening to this to hear about it. But when you deal with it, it's completely different, because I've never seen a more hollow human being that lacked any soul, was like staring into a void and nothing was looking back at me. I had to step away from
That's
counseling.
exactly it. What gets me every single time. And maybe this is the childishness in me, the immaturity. It's that children are supposed to be happy and there's light in their eyes when they play. And when I first went to childcare, that was the first thing that I noticed. It wasn't what their issues were. It was that the light in their children's eyes when they got older completely disappeared. That was just dullness or hardness. That was what motivated me. You want to know what motivated me and why I do the work I do? It's that light needs to come back on, and hope and that spirit. And that's the first thing you see when you know the child's not thriving. That's exactly it.
I had to step away from counseling for 3 months to prepare to go back and see the child again.
Definitely. I have debriefing twice a week. I don't anymore. Not because I'm better, but just said time. I actually thought this year I need debriefing sessions in counseling because I'm traumatized. I was even traumatized.
And ironically, as a female, your first instinct would be like to hug the child or to hold the child. But you can't do that because then that would trigger the child even more.
It's so funny. I had over the weekend a thank you note from one of the young women who resettled to America as a refugee years ago. And she private messaged me and sent me a thank you note I shared this story over the weekend. She's 25, 20, God, she's 25, 26, but I've known her, she was 10 years old, and she was telling me how to thank me for all the stuff. I remember her as that 10-year-old, whom the police brought to our center, and she had been abused within an inch of her life. And when I say this, I mean it. Her body was covered with scars. There was not an inch between one scar, one cut, and the next. She was covered, that badly abused, kicked and abused and beaten by her mother and stepfather, that she had the will to she was 10, to go and report it to the police station and slept outside when the police didn't know what to do with her and the police brought her to me. That was her. And that she's turned into this beautiful, amazing, incredible woman who was resettled alone with no family by herself because she had been so badly abused. And she grew up to be this most amazing, beautiful, inside and out young girl, despite it all, by herself. And I remember when she came and I was talking to her that the mother had come to our center and because the police had told her where she was. And she was sitting behind me because we had a gate so the mother couldn't come in. I was physically standing in front and yelling at the mother to go away. And that she loves her mother, yeah, despite it all. And she still had spirit and mind to be this beautiful, wonderful person, and she didn't destroy her. So where does that human spirit come? And I think that wasn't me or whatever, but it was definitely the community, not me. And the social workers and the adults and the people around her who were just ready to help. That's what we need.
I know that we need to wrap up. I just want to very quickly ask you about child marriage status in Malaysia.
Oh God, we have to. And it's so funny because I just told someone in the ministry, I'm like, when are we going to ban child marriage? Oh, sure. I don't understand why we have this issue in banning child marriage. I don't understand why we're not addressing the statutory rape, why we're punishing children for having sex when we don't have a proper sex education program. I just don't get it. Gee, I was just talking about this on Saturday. I was talking to someone who works in this area in child marriage, etc. And it's all related, yeah? Statelessness, children born of wedlock, it's all related. And how we vilify children being normal teenagers, right? You don't give them sex education, then you whack them for having sex. Are we going to ban child marriage? Yeah. We better ban child marriage in the next 5 years. That's one of my goals too. Yeah, I have loads of goals. And it's not a wish list because I'm going to make sure certain things happen. But I'm also not alone. Then there are enough of us, I think, moving to see how to push this forward. But it comes in waves. We push and then there's a pushback, or actually with the authorities, it's not pushback. There's just silence. And it's actually worse than pushback because they just ignore us. So to try to see how to sustain that push. Yeah, but we don't ban child marriage in this country. And the age of consent of marriage, it has to be 18 years old and above. Actually, even 18 is not, but listen, I'll be happy with 18. Because technically they're supposed to be adults, even though I really think that's such a shame. But yeah, we can do that. But one by one, a few states, one by one, I don't know, change is slow. I'm impatient. I want it done like in the next 2 years.
We definitely have a lot more to cover, but I do know that I need to let you go and we've reached the top of the hour. But one question, and I think maybe this is more point for you than any other, and many of the other guests I've had on. If you had one wish to make the planet a better place, what would it be?
Protect children. That goes without saying. Protect children, uphold their rights, treat them as individual beings. Why? are we so careless about them? We talk about climate change as their source of our inspiration and life moving forward in society. I'm like, you're stupid. It is not just the environment and climate change. It's children. And we treat them so horribly.
Thank you so much, Tini, for having me the platform.
I really appreciate it.
It's always a delight every time I meet up with you. So this has been The Centered Edge. I'm Dr. Manju Appathurai, and that's a wrap.
Well, thank you for joining me at The Edge. Now, the stories and opinions shared by my guests are theirs alone. They are raw, personal, and do not necessarily reflect my own views or professional stance. I present these dialogues as lived realities, not absolute truth. It's for you to examine, challenge, and interpret. Like any investigation into the human condition, the evidence is laid bare. What you take away from it is entirely up to you. Once again, this podcast is supported by Work. Work is not just a co-working space, it's an ecosystem built for human connection. So whether you're an established entity or a startup, find space to grow at work. Okay, be sure to turn on the notification bell icon for this podcast. And here's a surprise. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And if you do all four, there's a mystery gift potentially waiting for you. I am Dr. Manju Appathurai. Until the next time, stay centered, but keep your edge.